Good afternoon and welcome back to CUNY Athletics Conference Talk About It Tuesday, presented by the Hospital for Special Surgery. I'm Ryan Martin, the Director of Inclusive and Adaptive Sports at the City University of New York for the Athletic Conference. And today I am joined by Eli Wolf and Nikki Neves, who will be discussing their role within the Paralympic movement as athletes and as activists, and as well, where do we go from here? And kind of the evolution over the past several years in the Paralympic space. So, Nikki, great to have you. And I know you are probably just coming from a training, but I'll start with you and give you an opportunity to kind of introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. First, I want to say thank you, CUNY, for having me. I'm super excited. My name is Nikki Nieves. I am a Paralympian. I got the title because I got to go to Rio, and I won my first gold medal ever. Super cool. I've been playing sitting volleyball with Team USA since 2011 now, and we're currently gearing up for Tokyo. So I'm out in Edmond, Oklahoma, in the middle of the Midwest, training every day right up until we leave to go compete once again through COVID. So yeah.
Great, and we appreciate, I know you're a creature of habit, and so fitting these type of things in during your training, we really appreciate that, especially since your whole athletic world is a snow globe right now, and it's, but we'll dive into that. So, but thank you for joining us. Eli, go ahead.
Awesome. No, it's great to be here and great to be able to have this conversation today on inclusive sports, particularly at the collegiate level, but in all areas. I was a Paralympic soccer player back in the day in '96 and '04. I've also been involved in adaptive Paralympic inclusive sport, both on the research and education side, and also the advocacy side. I've had positions at Brown University and now University of Connecticut from an academic standpoint. And then also colleagues and I, Ted Fay, Mary Hums, David Legg. In the early 2000s, we started a project called Disability in Sport. And so that work has really been pushing the envelope for inclusion of persons with disabilities, of athletes with disabilities at all levels of sport, both at the collegiate, the Olympic, the professional levels of sport, as well as the grassroots and youth levels. So it's kind of been interesting to bring in the disability piece into the conversation, particularly around inclusion of race and gender. We've tried to bring in the disability piece into that conversation.
Great. Well, Eli, thank you for joining us as well. And I think we're really lucky to put together such a panel like this that has such a footprint on the Paralympic Games, like in the past and present. So, Nikki, I wanted to get started with you because you play sitting volleyball, and it dawned on me that part of our folks who are listening might not know some of the nuances to sitting volleyball. Could you just talk to us a little bit about what that looks like, assuming that there are some nuances that people wouldn't just generally know?
Yeah, definitely. So sitting volleyball, we don't play in a wheelchair and we don't play in scooters. We play on our booties. So you're scooting on the floor. Your hands work as your feet, essentially, helping you move around. Whenever you're making contact with the ball, you either have to be on the floor or low in one fluid motion, like you're diving for the ball for it to be okay. If not, they kind of do a gator at you and it's called butt lifting. Same rule applies when you're blocking. So stay on your booty or they're going to call you again on a butt lift. Something that definitely changes the game to make you be more strategic is the ability to block the serve. So 3 people in the front row, of course, 3 people in the back row. Those 3 people can set up specifically to block seams. So when you're passing in the back row, or even block a person if there's a weaker passer back there. Also, your butt is your feet, in a sense that when you're serving, your butt has to stay behind the serving line. Same thing if you're attacking from back row. So in traditional volleyball, when you're attacking, you have to start and jump before you cross the 5-foot line. And sitting volleyball, it's the 2-meter line. So when you're attacking, you have to make sure that you are behind the 2-meter, or your butt is behind the 2-meter when you attack. If not, it's considered over the plane and you have to like stay low and just pass it over. Let me think. I think that's about like it in regards to like different nuances. Everything else is kind of the same. So we have, we run a 5-1 where there's only one setter. We switch positions all the time. Everything, we have a middle hitter, we have an outside hitter. The middle hitter is the same as traditional volleyball. So you're running like a maniac to try and block everything that comes over, but instead of running, you're scooting like a maniac. But yeah, it's just like the little details that change major things. But if you have a pretty decent foundation in traditional volleyball, you'll probably be pretty decent in sitting as well.
Great. And so that's the next thing I want to touch upon before we throw a question here at Eli. But so you came from the able-bodied volleyball world and you're a Queens College, former student athlete. Talk about that transition a little bit. Did you know about adaptive sports previously, or did you just compete in volleyball because you loved volleyball? And when did you find out about like sitting volleyball and that as an opportunity?
Yeah, so it's weird. I was just explaining this to somebody the other day. I feel like that you're not the only adaptive athlete out there, but until you get into the adaptive sports world, you're kind of just like, oh wow, like there's a whole other world out there. And my parents never knew about it either. So it was kind of just like, you want to go play volleyball? Okay, go play. If something doesn't work, adjust and figure it out. So that's what I did. And the entire time, my fight in my head was always to be a great athlete. And if I was going to get benched for something, it was going to be because I needed more work on a skill and not because I had only one hand. So I, fought all my way up. I got to Queens College. I went on a partial scholarship. And I absolutely enjoyed it. And I feel like it's kind of like you finally made it, right? So like for me, I was like, man, I'm like playing NCAA Division II because QC's Division II. And my team and my coach at that time, Pascal Lubin, God bless her soul, didn't see me as the one-handed girl. They just saw me as Nikki, and she would get on me just like everybody else. So I was like, oh, I've made it. I'm good. Like they're finally looking at me like everybody else as an athlete. And I remember someone reaching out to our athletic director at the time. And he was like, yeah, they brought up sitting volleyball. They're wanting you to try it, just see how you like it. And I was like, oh yeah. But in my head, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Finally, like after a year and not even persuasion, but like my dad talking to me, a few friends, and they were like, if you don't like it, there's no obligation to stay there. And who knows, like it'll be fun, it'll be something different. And I tried it. Granted, it was very hard because I do come from traditional volleyball. So the concept of like having to scoot was weird to me because, in traditional volleyball, you're always sitting there with your arms out, ready to pass, or ready with your hands up, ready to like block. So that was kind of new to me. And being around other adaptive athletes that like were just so comfortable in their skin and concerned about their athleticism, meaning like they wanted to perform their best 100% of the time and were just okay with like popping off their prosthetic arms, popping off their prosthetic legs, and like talking trash to me at the net. It was completely amazing. I mean, mind you, I feel like I didn't buy all the way until about like my third camp. And I was like, you know what? I think I want to like take a break from traditional volleyball and just try sitting volleyball. And yeah, after my third camp, I bought all the way in. And honestly, for me, it was one of the best decisions ever. Just because I built such a network of like good friends and resources to continue with my Paralympic career, a great community of people. And like I said, like it opened my world to para sports. So like, I didn't know that there was wheelchair basketball and, wheelchair tennis. And literally it's just, I don't know, it's just crazy. It's like, it's hiding in plain sight. Like it's here, it's in front of all of us. But until you like have that one person that introduces you to it, or like that one clinic or that one camp. And I mean, for everybody, like able-bodied and disabled, like until you have like that little like doorway, like the entry door, then it's just like a whole new world of like possibilities.
Yeah, no, it is always fascinating, especially when you find athletes who go from, the able-bodied sports world to the adaptive sports world, and
Yeah.
like their stories and how they came across made that transition. So Eli, I wanted to kind of give you the opportunity to explain to our audience, like kind of what the whole Paralympic movement is about. And I know you've been involved since 1996. And then can you touch upon some of the changes that you've seen? Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to date you on that one, my fault. But can you talk about some of the, the changes you've seen, throughout the last 25, 30 years in the Paralympic Games?
Yeah, for sure. I actually just wanted to quickly comment on the journey, just because I have had a similar, in my athletic experience, I did have a similar journey from a soccer standpoint. I was very much in the mainstream able-bodied realm of soccer, and just competing all the way through and through high school into college. And I was at Brown University, Division One. I was a walk-on there, but I was still involved with the team, and I was just starting to get familiar with the Paralympic world myself, and kind of that whole transition of learning about it and becoming more familiar and kind of embracing it, and the evolving identity aspects, and just kind of that evolution. So when I heard you share your story, Nikki, it was very kind of brought me back and makes me realize that is a similar experience. But it's also interesting because I think part of this evolution of the adaptive and Paralympic world is to how to make it so that it isn't so random, so how do we make it so that it does become more of just a thing, and that it's kind of a part of the fabric of our sports culture, so that people can, young people can find out about these opportunities and can at earlier ages and embrace them and get involved. And so again, kind of going from kind of the randomness of it all to kind of more systemic and more streamlined. So, and I do think that has been part of what we've been seeing over the last, 10 to 15 years or so. I mean, it's definitely not perfect, and it's still evolving. I mean, I think even just to put things in perspective, like even this past weekend with the NCAA and the women's basketball, and to see that happen in our society, and the struggles and the evolution of women's sport, it kind of made me sit back and reflect on the fact that, with adaptive and disability and inclusive sport, we also are part of that journey as well, and we have a long way to go too. But I think, we really have seen a lot of progress, the opportunities for persons with physical disabilities in particular that are part of the Paralympic world, Paralympic movement. It has kind of evolved from the early 2000s to currently. I mean, there's really been an evolution from a number of separate disability organizations. So like wheelchair sports and CP sports and dwarf sports, and we still have USABA, which is US Association for Blind Athletes. So we still have some of the organizations, but there has been a shift to where the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee has come on board even more to take on the Paralympic movement. And so the United States is one of the few countries where it is now the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. So it's really been a really dynamic evolution. So even in 2019, where there was a name change, there was also equal pay for Olympians and Paralympians. So there were some big moments that didn't just happen out of the blue. I mean, that was like 20 years in the works kind of thing. But at the same time, I mean, it is to some extent a point in time of where the progress is happening. But I do think, although we are making some progress at the Olympic and Paralympic level, part of the conversation that we're having today is what's happening through the pathway. And, over the, years, particularly the last 10 to 15 years, where we've been doing work at the high school and collegiate level. In 2013, there was the federal guidance for inclusion of student athletes with disabilities at the high school and the college level. And so there are some things in place. But now it's like, well, what do we do to really fill those holes so that way we can really make more systemic opportunities for individual team sport. And we're really seeing, like with CUNY, with everything that is happening now, we're seeing some some models. But I think that's where the conversation we're going. But I think in terms of the overall Paralympic side, I mean, it has been amazing to see some of the progress. I mean, I'm always hopeful for more. You know, I guess I'm not satisfied. I mean, I think we have to still challenge, you know, the movement and challenge to do better. Like even with the television coverage that will happen in Tokyo, it's a great step forward. I mean, that's a great thing, but continuing to think about and engaging, you know, corporate sponsors and the industry, the NGBs, like, you know, we're all accountable. You know, this is not just, you know, something that is just sort of an add-on, or we're feeling like, well, we're doing this just because we feel bad for the disabled, but this is really a part of our sports culture and part of the industry. And so, so I think that shift of mindset where we have to keep pushing, you know, and like I said, you know, with women in sport overall, it's a struggle with LGBT, with race and ethnicity in sport. Disability is in there, and we have to make sure that keeps being brought to the forefront.
Yeah, I think oftentimes when we talk about, like, you know, the pillars of diversity, disability is the one that's kind of left out, you know, a lot of times in these larger conversations, especially when we talk about, you know, making a pipeline of, you know, athletes to be able to participate, even not even at the Paralympic level, but just from a genuine access point of view. The next question I'm going to throw at both of you, but Nikki, I'll let you go first, is how have you seen media's role in covering adaptive sports or the Paralympic movement? You know, I think most recently we all saw the, was it Jessica Long on the Toyota commercial during this, you know, an amazing Paralympic swimmer. So, you know, definitely during my lifetime, I've seen just the way that shifted. I'd love to get your two guys' perspective on it, Nikki.
Okay, how do I see Paralympic coverage? Like Eli was saying, it's a great step forward, having more coverage in general. Even Jessica being on that commercial, but just like you said too, I 100% agree. Like, it's great, but I'm not satisfied. I feel like in order for, this probably gonna sound a little weird, but like in order for the masses to buy in, so like for, you know, more sports programs, bigger corporate sponsors, NCAA, in order for more people and bigger people to buy in, we need those who value us to give us a bigger piece of the pie. And I feel like the struggle is that, like, when we look at the pie, we look at it as something that can finish, when essentially, like, no, like, there's room for everyone. It's just how much that we're receiving. So in a perfect world, like, we'd have just as much coverage as the Olympics did. In a perfect world, like, we'd have just as much resource. And it's not to say that like my NGB in particular doesn't give me resource, but of course there's always disparities because, you know, it's, you know, adaptive versus traditional. But I feel like the more we keep pushing to be seen, to be heard, the more companies buy into us, like Toyota did, the more other people are more willing to like jump on that bandwagon and see the value. Because if nobody's giving us that initial value, then why is it somebody else is going to buy into it? You know what I mean? It's kind of like the brand. If I think of the Paralympics, I think of it as a brand. So like with everything, you build that brand and it's like consistent work, you know, like what am I putting out there? What's like my story? What am I trying to like convey to everyone? And if no one's working or no one's willing to work with the Paralympic brands, it's going to be really, really hard to have other people buy into us so we can get the coverage that we need.
Oh,
Great,
yeah, just to build off of that, I mean, I think Yeah, I think it's just a really interesting opportunities. I think it's important to recognize some of the realities of the media and how they, um, and how do we kind of get beyond some of the status quo that sometimes with the media coverage, it tends to go right to the inspirational, like the hyper inspiration, the kind of the pity story with disability. And so I think that there's still kind of this long way to go about just overall disability coverage and athlete disabilities in the media. I mean, with all of athletes, with sport in general, there is an inspirational component. And so we don't want to lose that. I mean, obviously sports is about inspiration and inspiring ourselves, each other. And so being able to embrace that aspect of sport and inspiration, but I think it's those stories that take it more to the, the pity and you're feeling sorry, feeling sorry for the athlete or kind of those kind of stories rather than ones that are really more the empowering and the ones that really show that this is a sport story. And so I think that another aspect of the media side of it is content, so being able to really drive content and where are those stories and really there's so many stories, there's so many angles, and there's so many ways to cover adaptive and inclusive and para sport um, and so I think part of it is how do we get that next generation of journalists and the next generation of folks that really want to cover and get involved. And so I think some of the, kind of in this next wave of disability sport and adaptive sport, we really need to be strategic about how we're really engaging the journalists and the media and not just, and really going more mainstream, and in the way that we're seeing the ESPNW and the Undefeated. And, I do think there's quite a few, we're going to see more and more opportunities for innovation and entrepreneurship and ways of really changing the paradigm when it comes to media coverage. I think we're still a little bit stuck. We're stuck with that kind of the same old pity stories. And I think we just need to keep pushing and to be able to break that into the future. But I'm hopeful that Tokyo might help to facilitate that, but it may be post Tokyo where we're really seeing some dynamic changes.
Yeah, no, I just think in my lifetime how it was, I agree. It was always that inspirational story, right? And we talk about the disability first, and I think I was on a panel earlier in the year, and they were like, "Well, what's the difference between something that's too inspirational and what is inherently to sports?" And I was like, "Well, that's a slippery slope." But like, it's kind of one of those things it when you see it, right? Like, I don't. I think when we talk about the sport first and we talk about those sort of things and the disability is just another characteristic, I think that's when you're doing your job. And so I think we've kind of done a better job of communicating what is a considerable standard for these type of stories. But I would love to see it taken to the next level as well. So Nikki, I know that like athletes are creature of habit, right? And like you've got your training routine and you've got all the things you want to do. How has that been impacted by COVID recently over the last couple of months?
So the last couple of months getting back into our training site, like to get back into our routine was rough just because some athletes got sick, and if some athletes get sick, everything gets shut down. And then some athletes were super apprehensive about being around, the group because it is a team sport and, there's a bunch of us on one side and then a bunch on the other. And I mean, we're kind of close because the court's smaller. So that was really difficult. Trying to, be on the same page in regards to like workouts. So because we're all scattered across the United States, some states are super, super strict, like California, they're now just starting to kind of open back up, but my teammate didn't have any gym access, meaning like court space and lifting for a really long time. So she was struggling, just trying to like feel like she was actually contributing to the group. To whereas for me, like in Florida, there's just a whole mess down there and everybody's just open and doing whatever they want to do. So I kind of had everything, but I'm still terrified because I'm going to the gym and people don't have a mask on and they're just super, super close. And yeah, it was all over the place. Thankfully now we've kind of found a routine of things. There's a protocol put in place for when we're training, getting tested all the time, getting tested before we come in. If you're flying in, we kind of utilize bubbles. So like if I'm here training all the time with these girls, most likely like our drills and when we go into gameplay against one another, I'm going to be on the same side as the girls that I've been around for the past few weeks. But it's definitely getting a little better. I feel like now that we figured out kind of like how to maneuver with it, and that some people are getting vaccinated. So the vaccine's out and a lot of people are just opting to get it. And that just kind of like eases, you know, like the stress and the tension. So it's definitely gotten a lot better. Hopefully it'll continue on this road. But then again, like I've kind of just told myself, like nothing is promised, nothing is guaranteed. So as good as it's going now, who knows, it could shut down in the next month and then we're back to square one, just waiting for everything to clear up, you know?
Okay. Eli, we've got a question and this is from Ted. So, and you knew Ted would ask something, right? So Ted asks, please explain the 4 guiding principles for inclusion for athletes with disabilities in scholastic and collegiate sports as new pathways to parity by creating new critical mass of athletes. We should have just had Ted on this pod.
We should have Nikki answer that one.
Yeah, Nikki, hold on, you can take that one.
You can take that one.
I'll pass.
No, I mean, basically that's just really important to think about, but it's really just about the different ways that, you know, student athletes with disabilities are able to engage and be involved at the collegiate level, but also in really all aspects of sport. And not to say that they could be, I guess is the better way to say it. Because right now, when you think about it, you have those athletes that don't really need any accommodations. So kind of like Nikki, you know, some athletes that do need a minor accommodation. And so that would be like an athlete that may have a prosthetic to compete in sport, or maybe it's like you need for like a swimmer that you need a strobe light. You need some kind of minor accommodation to allow competition with non-disabled or, you know, in traditional settings. So those are like the first 2 principles. And then the third area is really the adding of events. So like, could you add in the wheelchair event or the visually impaired event or an event for athletes with, you know, for a limb, you know, or a CP, you know, ambulatory, basically an ambulatory event. So you have kind of the adding of the event opportunity. And then the fourth area, which might be kind of interesting to talk about because of Nikki, but to talk more about the team side of it. And so the team side of it is really to think about how the team component, particularly from an intramural rec, but even all the way up, you know, how could teams actually be inclusive in terms of athletes with and without disabilities? So you may have a few of the student athletes that have disabilities, but to create the team, how do you involve students without disabilities? And so that's kind of the fourth area of the team sport. And to really think about the involvement, you know, to have adaptive disability teams, but also to think about the notion of inclusive teams where, you know, and sitting volleyball is actually probably the one sport that is a really amazing example. It's already happening, I'm sure, around the country. Maybe it's not necessarily happening in the high schools and in the colleges, but in the communities. I mean, one of the sports that's totally viral and amazing is sitting volleyball, because basically whether you have a disability or not, you can sit and play. And so I think sitting volleyball is a great sport that, so for example, like just as a lacrosse team, like lacrosse players, you know, they may have their sticks, or, you know, any sport you have your equipment. So some of the sports, but if you have a disability or you don't, you may have your chair, you may have your, sitting volleyball equipment, whatever that is, you have whatever you have to join that sport. And so, so I think there's a few sports, that are really good on the team side, but then you can also think about it on like, tennis, wheelchair tennis is a great sport, for adding that in and adding those players onto the existing teams. So in many ways, the whole notion of inclusion is really, sport by sport, individual sport, team sport. And so that's part of the models, these four principles. It's basically just explaining the different ways that we can make inclusion happen within a sport environment. So I know it looks complicated from the question, but it's really just a kind of just about how to.
I don't know why we didn't invite Ted on this call.
Yeah. So I'm trying to make it simple. Like, how do we make this just easy? And it does become more complicated because of various reasons, which we can talk about.
Yeah, I think this is one of the bigger challenges that I've faced with the building out the program at CUNY, right? Explaining the cost benefit to having an inclusive model where you have, able-bodied athletes competing alongside, athletes with disabilities and different things like that. And it seems like it's one of those major questions that really kind of divides the world of adaptive sports. Some people are like, hey, yes, it's an average cost down. Let's add 4 able-bodied so we can have a full team practice, or there are people who are more traditional and say, hey, I can't play able-bodied basketball with a team, so why are we inviting them here? Nikki, as a current athlete, where do you kind of stand on that with, as Eli alluded to, sitting volleyball is an easier
It's already
sport
doing
to
it. Yeah.
body athletes in?
Yeah. Honestly, in terms of practice and stuff, I don't see any problem with it. What happens is I've ended up playing with guys or girls. Usually they are beach players. And beach players are really, really good with their hands. So you end up playing with them. And yeah, sometimes that might get a little frustrating because they are able-bodied and you're just okay, regularly, somebody might not be able to do that or get that. But essentially, it just makes me stronger, you know what I mean? To play against them, because then in my head, I'm okay, well, when I hop on the court against Russia or against Brazil, this person has done this to me so many times that now when it comes to me, maybe a little bit slower or it looks a little different, I can react to it and do what I need to do. As far as maybe competing in the college scheme of things, I don't feel if it's a startup, we're trying to build this program, we're trying to get everybody going. I don't see the problem in having able-bodied individuals hop on the court. I don't. Just because, I know disabled sports and para sports are for us, but we need everybody to get on board in order for us to grow it. And it doesn't make it any better if we're excluding them to play, because you're going to help me get better and you're going to help me grow the movement. And the more fun that you have and the more involved that you feel and the more that you feel you've put into it, I feel maybe 90-95% of the time, these are the same people that are going to go out and spread the word and build it somewhere else. So the people that are interning or hey, I can come for 2 months and help you come practice, they're going back to wherever, Arizona or whatever, random state, and they're bringing that back there and then maybe trying to create a program because now they see that there's a need for it. And they see that, this creates the pipeline for us to get to USA, because right now for a lot of sports, the pipeline is so small and in only one area. So if we can get it to where everybody's loving it, everybody's playing, including able-bodied individuals, is what's getting the program off the ground, then so be it. It's not to say that it's going to last forever, but if it's going to take me having 2 or 3 people to complete the team so we can actually get the program going, so the people that invested their time and money see that it's a good thing that they did, then so be it. Because later on, the more athletes will come and more individuals will come and the program will grow out, and then thanks guys, you helped us, but now we have the disabled athletes to fill in those seats to be able to make it what we're wanting to.
Yeah, I think just the
I
critical
also
mass.
think it
Yeah, I
goes a
think the
long way to
Go
I
ahead.
think it also goes a long way to destigmatize the sport, right? You know, like
Mhm.
how many times we had an able-bodied sports person in the wheelchair basketball or para soccer or sitting volleyball space, and they're like, wait, this is hard. Like this is
Yeah,
legit, right? That goes, I think that goes a long way to, you know, fostering that culture of understanding, you know, when we can bring people in, because otherwise I feel like we're creating this thing where it's harder to get something functional to work, you know, to your point, but also like we're putting our own stigma on it, like, hey, this is our own thing, which you can't have both, right? You can't say, hey, we want this to be our own thing, but we want to be widely accepted and treated the same.
I will say, there's a big tournament and it's called Adult Nationals. It's been going on, man, for a while now. There's a whole sitting division. And the only like major rule that it has, like when you bring a team, is that you can only have 3 national team members on it. So it's usually like me and my other 2 teammates that are really close and we play with the team. But it doesn't matter. So it's probably like the one tournament that I look forward to all year just because it's everybody that's playing and you have like ex-Olympians and like basketball players that want to play and like indoor players that want to play. And it's just everybody's playing and having a great time. And it's both traditional and non-traditional. It's literally for everybody. And it's just created like a really cool community where it's more people that know about it. And then when you're out in these random places, they're like, oh yeah, like I played in opens one year and I played sitting and I tried it with my high school kids. So I mean, if it could work for CUNY and getting, you know, more people to come out and come play and make it inclusive, I say go for it.
Yeah, I think the critical mass and the volleyball has really been at the forefront in many ways to kind of show how what's possible. And yeah, I just think from a pure sport standpoint, it really will help to grow. And yeah, clearly having the sport still for persons with disabilities and athletes with disabilities, but still to just create that connection and to invite people in and to make it so this is sport. You know, and I also think from the standpoint of rather than, you know, creating two, you know, duplicating a whole separate system, you know, rather than creating just a whole separate universe for adaptive, you're really trying to build that inclusive model so that this is really part of the existing sports culture and system. And I think that's what we're seeing with the Olympic and Paralympic piece, really uniting together. And so Olympians supporting Paralympians, Paralympians for Olympians. And so I think that whole vibe of that notion and how that can trickle down into the collegiate and into the grassroots. I mean, it just, rather than, you know, I know we talk about like, how are we going to get these resources? How are we going to, you know, create a whole new system, all the trainers, all the, you know, whole, you know, rather than replicating all of that, we're using the existing infrastructure like you're doing at like CUNY, you know, and so that's why I think CUNY is really a great in many ways for what you're showing is possible. And then how do you continue to further that, you know, throughout other conferences and really continuing to show that, you know, that collegiate sport is not just an able-bodied thing, you know, that people with disabilities that have a rightful place within the collegiate environment. And I think that's really important. Yeah.
How do you, that leads me into my next question, and Eli, I'll start with you on this one. How do you see groups like NERSA and the NCAA really getting involved in the space? We've seen, you know, and you talked about it, how the US Paralympics has combined with the US Olympics, right? And they've shown it in an inclusive approach, you know, and equalizing standards and different things like that. How do you see groups such as NERSA and the NCAA involved in the space to help grow that opportunity for athletes with disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an evolution and, you know, kind of a strategic and really thinking about it sport by sport, you know, and really being able to look at what sports are really right there and ready to happen, and where there's also support from the NGB. You know, there's lots of different factors of looking at each sport. But in terms of at the you know, the rec, intramural rec club level, and then getting into the varsity level of the NCAA, you know, really about pushing that piece. I mean, the NCAA has come a little bit forward in terms of recognizing that disability is a pillar. It is an area of where they need to be looking at. I mean, disability is very broad. So you have the physical disabilities, you also have learning disabilities. And if you look at the NCAA, there is a big learning disability dimension. But in terms of the physical disabilities, the adaptive and the inclusive sport, you know, it's really being prepared, being strategic about what sports are ready to go and what's the strategy behind it at a conference by conference level. And so sometimes it's like, well, what's, you know, it's both what can the NCAA do for us, but also how are we prepared to engage with the NCAA? So it's what, you know, and to what level is that pipeline going to really be enhanced? And so part of it is really looking at it in terms of what are those template policies. And so that's why the 4 principles of inclusion really matter, because sometimes we may say, oh, well, it's just about the team or it's just about adding the event. But really, when we're looking at it, we're also talking about the athletes that may like Sam Grew at Notre Dame or Hunter Woodhall. You know, there's some athletes that are able to be on the able-bodied, you know, the existing teams. And so there's different ways of making inclusion happen. And so part of it is to further this policy approach of getting each conference, each school, the NCAA to really embrace that broader strategy. And part of that is tied into the relationship between the NCAA and the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And so what we're seeing over the last year in particular, and even in real time over the next couple of years, is that understanding of the evolution of para athletes through the collegiate, high school, collegiate, you know, through that pipeline. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, you know, which sports we really are able to see, you know, volleyball, tennis, track and field, swimming, you know, seeing where wheelchair basketball would go, you know, sure some of these other sports would go in terms of what makes sense in terms of the evolution. But I do think that because of where some of these sports are, that we're also going to see continued growth at the intramural and rec level. And so that's why NERSA is important. And so the NERSA involvement of really buying into that strategy of, you know, growth at the intramural club and rec level. And so we are seeing more and more happening in campus rec around adaptive sport. But I think we're going to see over the next 3 to 5 years, maybe 5 to 10 years, increased strategy at a sport by sport level for what's happening at the collegiate level into the Paralympic level. So yeah, it's an exciting time. I mean, you know, the last 10 years, we've been working on it in different ways, and we've had fits and starts, and you feel like you're right on the cusp, and then people leave, or, you know, there's just, the reality of this is just, it's a part of it is just to stay persistent. And again, going back to like women's sports or, you know, all these areas of diversity and inclusion and making sport better, you know, disability is right there. And so, and that's why we just need more and more like Nikki and others, you know, being willing to speak truth, and being willing to say this works. And, you know, and I really see, I mean, volleyball is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, Nikki, we have a question in the chat for you. It says, to what extent are the sitting volleyball teams engaged with I'm trying to think, I think with this is the OTC athletics. Is there a residency and facility relationship? Are some of your team members as well allowed different level of access as far as living on campus and different things of that nature?
Yeah, so I'll explain it all, because I don't know if you mean like OTC, which is like OPTC now, in Colorado Springs. So with the bigger ones, so like in Colorado Springs, you get more access and more research depending on how well your team does. So right now, we're ranked #1 and we did really well in the game. So we have gotten a lot of resources. We usually fly out once a year. We didn't go this year because of COVID, or actually, we didn't go in 2020 because of COVID. And I'm not sure that we're going this year because everything's kind of gotten mumble jumbled, but we usually go out there once a year to train and to get like all of our testing done. So we'll get like bone density scans, blood work done. We'll see eye doctors if we need to see eye doctors, physical trainers, like just everything that you could think of that an athlete would need is literally like at your fingertips. Regarding individual, like the sports within themselves, we're kind of, I feel like sports are kind of everywhere depending on your sport. So like in Colorado Springs, the main sports that train out of there are swimming. I know there's a few track and field people. What else is there? There's judo, there's boxing, there's fencing, there's shooting. And those are like the main ones that are there. Of course, teams can come in and out and train. I know basketball, wheelchair basketball goes there maybe like once or twice a year. I know they have their tryouts there. But besides that, everyone's kind of split out. So indoor, they're over in California and Anaheim. For sitting, we're over in Edmond, Oklahoma at University of Central Oklahoma. And I like our setup because even though we're not like at a traditional training center, our staff and my coach, our staff, they're just amazing. They've worked really hard to try and provide the same resources that we would get at the OPTC. So we get massages, we get chiropractic work. Even though we didn't get to go to Colorado this year, all of like our DEXA scans, so bone density, blood work, physicals, everything was taken care of this year here at our training site. Another thing that's really cool is that we live in apartments, so it's kind of like freer. You're not necessarily like in a dorm. So I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with one teammate, full kitchen. After practices, they provide us lunch. And if you're a national team resident, you pretty much have the option to come and train for extended periods of time, like how I do, or you can come and live here as a full-time resident. Or you can maybe come like, you know, once you come for camp and then you can stay for like a week after or a week before. So as long as you're on the national team, you know, you have more leeway and more like option to do what you want to do and what you need to do to get the training that you need. One step under like our developmental teams, they have those options as well. They look a little different, but I mean, our staff is really good as long as there's space and it's not essentially like gonna impede on like national training or anything like that. They allow it. And even right now we have a girl that's on a developmental team that trains with us every day. And I think that's really cool just because, you know, like you want to continue to grow the sport, you want other athletes to come. But yeah, no, we definitely have a lot of resources. It might not look the same as, you know, the traditional volleyball team, so like the indoor team. It might not look the same in terms of like dollars, so that might get a little sticky. What their budget looks like to what our budget looks like and what we can afford. But as of yet, with the money that we do receive, I'm very thankful for the resources that we do have. So I'm satisfied, but I'm still pushing for more.
Great. Thank you for explaining that. So we're coming up close to an hour. So I want to offer you guys a chance to, you know, kind of some closing thoughts. And what I'd like to do is kind of hear where you hope the Paralympic sports movement is in another 10 years, right? Like, because we've seen tremendous amount of progress. You know, Nikki, for you to talk about all the different levels of support that you're getting now, you know, as a sitting volleyball athlete. And we all agree there's been tremendous strides made, but there's, you know, room to grow, as we've all mentioned. So in your ideal world, where do you see this going? Nikki, we're assuming you're not still playing sitting volleyball in 10 to 12 years, but you are. Kudos to you.
No, I actually plan on being done in 2028 when we finish on home turf. But man, I really want to see people continue to embrace it and continue to grow the sport. I want colleges and universities to see para sports as their parallel instead of putting them in a different department. I see a lot of colleges and universities trying to, we want parasport and we want this and we want that, and then they don't even put it within the athletics department. They just stick it somewhere else, and it's just kind of like it feels almost kind of like a project instead of like no, this is real life, we're athletes. And I don't think they see para athletes as athletes. And I think that's one of the biggest things, like we mentioned before about inspirational stories. Like, I want to inspire you because I got on the court and I blocked every single ball, and then after that you realized I had one hand. Like, I don't want you to just look at me for my disability and then see the athlete later. And I wish that for all para athletes. And I don't know, I want it to continue to grow, and I want, equity and equality for everyone everywhere within para sports. So not only getting equal pay when it comes to medals, but getting equal pay when it comes to being a professional athlete. So if, a girl's getting paid so much and, you have the para equivalent and they're getting paid pennies on the dollar, like, no, that's not okay. Like, I want people to see the value in para athletes as well. And I want, like, my biggest hope is like in 2028, when it comes to home soil, I really want USA to hit it out of the park. Like, it's the biggest opportunity that you have to like really showcase and display like what we've been working on and what we've been doing, and what greater opportunity do you have with all the growth that's already happened to really knock it out of the park in 2028. You know what I mean? So I don't know, I just hope that it just continues to grow and it's continued to be embraced, and that it continues to be a movement, but people see it as something that's regular and normal, as opposed to like, oh, I didn't know this existed. Like, when you say the Olympics, you say Paralympics with it because they're in one, not like, oh, the Olympics and, oh, what the Paralympics? No, it's like, oh yeah, the Olympics and Paralympics are this year, So just, I don't know, I want it to become, right now, it feels like it's a baby. I want it to become an adult.
Good way to put it.
I have nothing else to add after that.
Yeah, I was going to say
Yeah, I'm good. No, I just, really to echo everything that Nikki said there is excellent. I guess, for me, the one piece, in addition to the growth and the evolving growth and the 2028 and more of the seamless aspects, and I do think that there's this role of the media that we need to continue to stay focused on. And, I really hope that in 10 years, we are able to really cultivate that even more, and just the powerful voices that we have, and, the building of expertise and the professionalization of the sector, more and more sport management programs, or, young people are wanting to go into the field of adaptive and para sports. So it's just becoming better and better. And so I think that, obviously we don't want to wait 10 years. We want it to happen tomorrow. But, I think that to the extent that we're really building that foundation, we're building our expertise, we're building the future leaders, we're getting more and more people with disabilities in positions of leadership, positions of influence, of power. I think all of that, but the more that we can really change the discourse and the representation, so that it really is not, it's not kind of the status quo, but it's really toward the future and really progressive and innovative and dynamic. And, I think that is hopefully what we'll see in, 10 years time.
Great. Well, I want to thank both of you guys for joining us today and sharing with our CUNY students and administration, kind of the Paralympic Games, where it's been and where it's going. Nikki, we want to wish you the best of luck with your training and following you. Eli, as always, thank you. Thank you for your contributions and your insight on the whole big picture. So for those of you guys who stayed with us, thank you very much. This is CUNY Talk About It Tuesday, sponsored by the Hospital for Special Surgery. And if you've missed any part of this or any part of our Talk About It Tuesday series, please feel free to go to cunyathletics.com or follow along on social media. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you guys, I appreciate it.